It's roughly 4,000 years ago. You're standing at the mouth of a shallow rock shelter. Not quite a cave, more like a ledge. The hillside forgot to finish, and the sky is doing something you have never had a word for. The light goes first. A white-hot crack splits the horizon in half, close enough that you feel it in your back teeth. Then, about 2 seconds later, the world just detonates. A sound so low and so enormous, it doesn't enter through your ears so much as it passes through your chest like a fist. The ground shakes. The trees at the edge of the clearing whip sideways. The fire you've been nursing for 3 hours, the fire that took an embarrassing amount of effort, gutters dims and nearly goes out. You have no meteorology degree. You have no word for atmospheric electrical discharge. Life. You don't know what a cumulonimbus cloud is, and frankly, neither does anyone else within 1,000 miles of you. What you have is a body full of adrenaline, a group of maybe 15 people pressing against the rock wall behind you, and a brain, a staggeringly capable, pattern-hungry, meaning-making brain that is absolutely refusing to accept that what just happened has no author. That's the question. Not just what ancient humans felt when they heard thunder. The fear part is obvious. That's just biology. But what they thought. What story did that brain build, in the dark, with the fire almost out to explain, the sky breaking open above them? Because here's the thing, they built something. Every single culture that ever existed built something. And when you line them all up next to each other, the answer stops being a history lesson and starts being a mirror. Short answer, they thought something very powerful and very angry was up there. Long answer is what this whole video is about. Plus, chapter title card. The scared animal problem. Let's start before the stories. Because before the stories, there is just the body. And the body has opinions about thunder that have nothing to do with culture or mythology or anything you learned in school. When a loud, sudden, unexpected sound hits your auditory system, your brain does not politely wait for context. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure buried deep in your temporal lobe that has been doing this job for somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million years, fires before your conscious mind has even registered that a sound occurred. Researchers at the University of Geneva demonstrated in a 2012 study that the fear response to sudden loud noise can trigger in as little as 10 milliseconds. Your conscious awareness of the sound comes in at around 300 milliseconds. You are afraid before you know what you are afraid of. That is not a bug. That is the entire point. For your ancestors on that ledge, thunder wasn't just startling. It arrived with a full package of genuine immediate threats. Lightning ignited forests. Rain swelled rivers and flooded shelters. Storms brought wind that could bring down the dead trees your camp happened to be near. The sound itself, that subinfrasonic chest thump, is processed partly by the same systems that detect the vibration of a very large animal moving nearby. There is a reasonable argument made by biological anthropologist David Geary, among others, that human thunder fear is at least partly a deep time confusion between loud percussive sky event and something enormous is approaching. Your body, in other words, was not entirely wrong. Thunder meant danger. The fear was calibrated. But here's the thing. Fear is not a story. Fear is just chemistry. What makes humans strange, what makes us specifically strange, among all the animals that also flinched at that sound, is what happens in the next 30 seconds after the fear peaks. The deer bolts and then forgets. The chimpanzee screams and then huddles. The human looks at the other humans, and someone eventually says, "What was that?" Not as a literal question, as a demand. The human brain does not tolerate unexplained causation. It will invent an explanation before it will sit with a blank. Cognitive scientists call this agent detection, the tendency to perceive intention and will behind events, especially threatening ones. Pascal Boyer at Washington University has argued that agent detection is so deeply wired into human cognition that it runs on a hair trigger. It is far cheaper to wrongly assume there is an agent behind a sound than to wrongly assume there isn't one. A false positive costs you a moment of fear. A false negative costs you your life. Your ancestors weren't superstitious because they were primitive. They were superstitious because their brains were excellent. That distinction matters. Let that sit with you. Plus, chapter Title card. The first explanations. So the brain demands an agent. What agent does it reach for? Here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because when researchers look at the oldest recoverable layers of human belief, not written mythology, which is relatively recent, but oral traditions, cave art, burial patterns, and the structural, deep grammar of stories shared across cultures that never made contact, a remarkably consistent picture emerges. The agent behind thunder was almost always one of three things: a giant animal, a powerful ancestor, or a being so far beyond human scale it required a new category entirely. Let's take the animal explanation first, because it's the oldest and the strangest, and it keeps showing up in places that should have nothing in common. In numerous indigenous traditions across sub-Saharan Africa, thunder is produced by a massive bird, sometimes described as having wings that span the width of the sky, sometimes as a creature that looks like an eagle but operates at a scale that makes eagles look like sparrows. The Zulu call it impundulu, the lightning bird. The Lovdu have their own version. The Bantu-speaking cultures of Central Africa have variations on the same image that researchers have documented independently of each other. Across the Pacific, in the traditions of several Native American nations, from the Ojibwe of the Great Lakes to the Sioux of the Great Plains, you get Thunderbird, a creature whose beating wings produce the thunder, whose eyes flash lightning, whose very presence reshapes the weather. In parts of ancient Mesopotamia, early storm concepts were sometimes depicted with wing-like attributes. In the Rig Veda, the earliest stratum of Sanskrit religious text, dated to somewhere between 1500 and 1200 BCE, the storm deity Indra is partially associated with eagle imagery. These cultures did not talk to each other. The Ojibwe and the Zulu were not comparing notes, and yet they both landed on giant bird. This is not coincidence, and it is not magic. It is cognitive convergence. The human brain, confronted with a sound it cannot explain, reaches for the most powerful animal template it has available. For most of human prehistory, the most threatening airborne sound a human could hear was the wingbeat or screech of a large bird of prey, the kind that could take a child, the kind you watch the sky for. Thunder, which comes from the sky, which is sudden, which is loud, which is dangerous, gets filed in the same cognitive drawer. The explanation isn't wrong by the standards available. It's an inference. It's actually quite a reasonable inference. Let that sink in. Plus, chapter title card, the anger problem. But the animal explanation only gets you so far. Because the thing about thunder, the thing that separates it from, say, a landslide or a flash flood, is its rhythm. Thunder comes and goes. It rumbles, it quiets, it builds, it crashes. It seems, in other words, to have moods. And mood implies something with an interior life. This is where the ancestor explanation enters. And this one is older in some ways than the animal explanation, or at least it runs parallel to it in a way that's hard to fully untangle. In cultures across Polynesia, parts of West Africa, among the ancient Chinese, and in the early religious layers that archaeologists have reconstructed from Bronze Age burial sites across Europe, thunder was understood as the voice or the activity of the dead. Specifically, the powerful dead. The ancestors who had been mighty in life did not stop being mighty when they died. They moved somewhere else, somewhere above and beyond, and when they were displeased, you heard it. The Maori tradition, for example, carries deep resonances of thunder as a communication from ancestral forces. Similar structures appear in the early animistic layers of what would later become Shinto in Japan. Why anger specifically? Why not joy? Why not indifference? Because thunder arrives with consequences. Rain that destroys crops, lightning that burns a hut, hail that kills animals. When something powerful causes harm, and that harm seems to follow no pattern, you can reliably predict. The most useful model is not, this is random, which leaves you helpless, but this is displeasure, which at least implies there is something you can do about it. If the sky is angry, maybe the sky can be appeased. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you can do something right. The story that includes your own agency is always more survivable than the story in which you are simply at the mercy of random chaos. This is not naivety. This is extraordinarily sophisticated emotional risk management. Your ancestors were not confused. they were solving the correct problem with the tools they had. The correct problem was, how do we maintain some sense of control in an environment that can kill us without warning? The answer they found: build a relationship with the thing that threatens you, learn its preferences, keep it appeased, is not so different from what meteorologists do today. We just have better instruments. Plus, chapter title card, the God shape. And then somewhere, nobody knows exactly when, but the evidence points to somewhere between 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 5, 0, 0, 0, 0 years ago, around the same period as the behavioral modernity explosion, the first unambiguous art and ritual, and deliberate burial. The animal and the ancestor merged into something new, something that needed a bigger word. The sky being, the storm god, the thing that is not quite a creature and not quite a person, but has something of both, and is so vastly more powerful than anything in human experience, that thinking about it produces a specific emotional cocktail that your brain does not have a clean category for, something between terror and awe, and the uncomfortable feeling that you are being watched. By the time we reach the earliest written mythologies, the Sumerian texts from around 2500 BCE, the early Egyptian theological compositions, the oldest strands of Vedic tradition, the sky thunder entity has already completed this evolution. Enlil in Mesopotamia, set in Egypt in his role as storm and chaos, Indra in the Vedic world, and then in what is perhaps the most famous example, Zeus, though the Greeks were relative latecomers to a tradition already thousands of years deep. What is striking, what is genuinely arresting when you read across these traditions, is how consistent the profile is. The thunder deity is almost always male, or at least presented through masculine energy ruler or co-ruler of the cosmos, prone to emotional volatility, capable of great generosity, and also catastrophic punishment associated specifically with justice or order, in a way that connects weather events to moral events. The storm comes because something was out of balance. The lightning strikes because something was not right. This last part is the most interesting, because what it reveals is that our ancestors were not just explaining the weather, they were using the weather as a moral system. The thunder was not random, it was responsive. And if it was responsive, then the world had a shape, a structure, an underlying logic, even if that logic was sometimes terrifying. This is an extraordinarily comforting idea. This is arguably one of the foundational ideas that made large-scale human cooperation possible. If the universe has a moral shape, then moral behavior has consequences beyond the immediate social. You are being watched not just by your neighbors, but by the sky. Let that sit with you for a moment. Plus, chapter, title card, the first scientists. Here's what gets left out of most conversations about ancient mythology, and this is the part that I think deserves more space than it usually gets. Some of them knew it wasn't magic, or at least some of them suspected it wasn't quite what everyone else thought it was. In ancient Greece, while Zeus was busy hurling thunderbolts through the popular imagination, a small number of thinkers in the Ionian tradition were working on a different kind of answer. Anaximander, writing around 550 BCE, proposed that thunder and lightning were caused by wind being compressed inside clouds and then bursting out violently. Aristotle, roughly 2 centuries later, had a sophisticated, if not entirely accurate, pneumatic theory of storm formation. These were not men who had rejected the sacred. Most of them were deeply religious, by any modern standard. But something in the same human brain that invented Indra and Zeus was also simultaneously unsatisfied with Indra and Zeus as a final answer. In China, by around 300 BCE, natural philosophers were distinguishing between the mythological account of thunder and what observation actually suggested. In ancient India, the Nyaya school of logic was treating weather events as problems to be analyzed rather than beings to be appeased. The hunger for the real mechanism ran alongside the hunger for the meaningful story, often in the same culture, often in the same person. This matters because it scrambles the simple narrative, the one where humans were fearfully superstitious for millennia, and then science arrived and cleaned everything up. It wasn't like that. The rational impulse and the mythological impulse are not opposites. They are both expressions of the same underlying drive. the need to understand what is happening, why it is happening, and what it means for you. The difference is in the method. The drive is identical. Your ancestors were not waiting for you to come along and set them straight. They were already asking the question. They just didn't have the instruments yet. That is not primitive. That is breathtaking. Plus, chapter, title card, what thunder meant in the body. We've been in the head for a while. Let's go back to the body for a moment, because the body has its own story about thunder that doesn't get told enough. Sit with this image. It is maybe 1,5,0,0,0 years ago, deep winter, somewhere in what is now southwestern France. Your group, 23 people, 4 generations, is sheltered in the mouth of a limestone cave. Outside, a late-season electrical storm is running through the valley. The thunder is bouncing off the rock walls and arriving from multiple directions at once, overlapping building. The fire is in the center. Everyone is close. The youngest children are pressed into the bodies of the adults nearest to them. Nobody is speaking. The thunder comes again, enormous wall shaking. And for a moment, every person in that cave is having exactly the same experience at exactly the same time. There is a word that the philosopher Emile Durkheim used for what happens in moments like this: collective effervescence. The sensation of individual boundaries, dissolving of being part of something larger than yourself, produced specifically by shared intense experience. He was writing about religious ritual, but what he was describing was born here, in the cave, in the storm, in the moment when 23 people flinch simultaneously and then in the aftermath press closer together. Shared fear is a bonding technology. It is one of the most powerful ones our species has. The thunder that terrified your ancestors also, every single time, reminded them that they were not alone, that the people around them were feeling exactly what they were feeling, that their fates were tied together under the same shaking, sky. The same event that produced the God story produced the community. The storm didn't just shape belief, it shaped belonging. You were made for this. Your need to find meaning in frightening things. Your instinct to turn toward other people when the sky breaks open. That's not a weakness. That's the oldest social technology your species has. Plus, chapter title card, the long echo. Here's a thing worth sitting with as we get to the end of this. You know what thunder is now. You have learned at some point, between childhood and wherever you are now, that lightning is an electrostatic discharge between cloud layers, or between cloud and ground. That thunder is the sonic shockwave produced by the rapid superheating of the air column along the lightning's path, that the delay between flash and boom tells you roughly how far away the strike was, that none of it is aimed at you, that none of it means anything. First, axed is un, and axed, n, axed is axed, n, 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 delay, n, 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 n. And yet when a really close strike hits, when the flash and the boom are nearly simultaneous, when the ground does that thing, you still flinch. Your amygdala still fires at 10 milliseconds. And something somewhere below the meteorology degree, and the adult rationalism, and the decade of not believing in anything, still produces for about half a second, something that feels uncomfortably like the oldest feeling in the human catalog. The feeling that something very large and very powerful just expressed an opinion, and it might have been about you. You're not imagining that. That feeling has a history. It goes back 4,0,0,0,0 years. At least. Probably much longer. Every person who ever stood in a storm and felt that particular flavor of smallness was feeling the same thing you feel. The Sumerian priest who made an offering to Enlil after the storm. The Vedic poet who wrote about Indra's voice shaking the mountains. The Ojibwe elder who told the children about Thunderbird. The person on that limestone cave ledge in France, pressing a child's head against their chest while the walls shook. The story changed. The mechanism got explained. But the feeling that ancient wired-in meaning hungry awestruck, half-second, stayed. Because it was never really about the thunder. It was about what the thunder revealed, that you are small, and the world is enormous, and you are not alone in it, and that somehow, against all available evidence, that is okay. That it might even be in some hard-to-articulate way, exactly as it should be. The sky broke open, and your ancestors built a god to stand inside the crack. You inherited the god, and then you explain the crack. But that half-second of awe, that belongs to both of you equally. So next time a storm rolls in and you find yourself watching the sky with that particular expression on your face, are you doing something different from what they did? Or are you doing exactly the same thing, just with better vocabulary? Leave that in the comments. I'd genuinely love to know what you think.